which are across a wide range of women's health issues, from child marriage to unsafe abortion to teen pregnancy to violence against women, and of course have reported all over the globe on these issues. And so I'm going to give them some time to talk about their specific projects and how they approached reporting on these issues and telling those stories. But we really also want this panel to be a resource for you guys and for us, because there's going to be sort of a back and forth conversation during the Q&A about how journalists can work with people who work in women's health, how we can collaborate with you guys, the best ways to pitch us, the best ways to form relationships with us, and the panelists are going to talk about how they worked with people in public health to report out their stories and what worked and what didn't work. And of course, this whole panel is comprised of reporters who have received grants from the Pulitzer Center on crisis reporting, which funds these international projects that otherwise wouldn't get done, this long-form reporting on public health issues, and specifically a lot of really great women's health stories have come out of it. And the idea is to affect policy, to elevate the conversation about these issues, and ultimately and most importantly to save women's lives. So I'm going to just introduce our panelists. Next to me we have Anna Santos, the Pulitzer Center's 2014 Persephone Meal Fellow. She's an independent print and online journalist whose work has been published in The Washington Post, The Atlantic, Rappler, Marie Claire, among others. She's reported on HIV/AIDS, gender issues, sexual violence, and reproductive health and rights in Indonesia, Thailand, Jordan, Israel, Papua New Guinea, and her home country, the Philippines. Living in one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world, Anna has begun writing about disaster preparedness and response and the many ways it's interconnected with reproductive health and population. Next to Anna, we have Amedo Akpe, who is a Nigerian print journalist for Business Day and the 2013 Pulitzer Center Persephone Meal Fellow, and a 2014 Nieman Fellow at Harvard. Amedo has reported on family planning within a broader Pulitzer Center-supported project on the health impact of U.S. foreign aid in northern Nigeria. And at the end, we have Allison Shelley, who is an independent documentary photographer and multimedia journalist. She's a former staff photographer for The Washington Times and previously director of photography for Education Week newspaper. Her current work focuses on identity and belonging during crisis. She's covered Nigeria's abortion crisis and menstrual exile in Nepal, which she'll talk about today, among other topics, with grants from the Pulitzer Center. Her photography and video has been featured in Time, The New York Times, The Atlantic, The Washington Post, NPR, Al Jazeera America, The Wall Street Journal, The LA Times, Paris Match, and The Guardian, among others. And she's received awards and financial support from the Pulitzer Center, National Press Photographers Association, and the White House News Photographers Association. So please welcome our panelists, and we'll start with Anna.
I think I need to turn this on. Okay. Hi. So I started my writing career as a sex columnist in a men's magazine, and I know exactly how that sounds. But can you imagine the pressure of my job? I mean, I have to look like I have sex all the time. So much pressure. But for today, I'm here to talk to you about reporting on reproductive health in the Philippines as a freelance journalist. I have to emphasize that I work as an independent or as a freelance journalist because that will impact how I need to look for stories and how I hope to engage with NGOs, with government officials, and with academic researchers for stories. And I'm going to start off by giving you an overview of what reproductive health is like in the Philippines. I need to play the video, please.
Ako po si Rosalie Capinian, 22 pong naging anak ko. Lima po yung patay. Sabi ng anak ko na, gutom na ako, lalo na yung grade 4 ko. Pag nagugutom siya, iyak na lang ako. Gusto lang po namin sanang ana, 3 lang. Ano po yung edad natin nung una po tayo nagkaanak? Ang anak ako mag-60 lang. Ako po
po si Lola Jane Odoran. Kapapanganak ko pa lang. Mag-16 sa November.
I hope you were able to see the subs. It's a story of Rosalie, who has 22 children. Actually, she's been pregnant 22 times. She has 17 children. And in the same neighborhood is a girl named Laura Jane, who has had her first baby at 16. So there are actually other girls in that neighborhood who have had 2 kids by the time that they're 16. And ultimately, their story, the story of Rosalie and the story of Laura Jane, is one of too many, too old, too young. Okay. But it's also a story that's been told too much, right? And our challenge is really, how do you keep on retelling that story so you don't get the usual media fatigue, you don't get, okay, spaced out, I've heard that one before, doesn't affect me, I don't care. And we always need to find a way to keep on engaging people on the issues that ride on reproductive health. So, next slide, please. The great thing about reporting on reproductive health is that you can find just about any story angle and intersect it with reproductive health. And I don't know if that's just because I work and live out in the Philippines, where there's just no such thing as a slow news day. You know, we talk about climate change and disaster preparedness, it's there. We can intersect what happens to the pregnant women in the displacement camps. Humanitarian crises, we've got an insurgency problem down south. What happens there? Business, we can talk about how it saves money to do family planning. Just about anything. And actually what I'd like to see more is how to intersect the idea of reproductive health rights and pleasure, because I think that's the missing gap in actually engaging more people in our message. The way that sex and reproductive health is discussed in the Philippines is just either very political or very religious or very clinical. It leaves no space for young girls like Laura Jane, that you saw there, who just want to know more about how to plan pregnancies, about how to not get pregnant, how to be in a relationship. That kind of very basic stuff is, I think, what we're losing at. And so as a freelance journalist, that's why I need to look also at reproductive health from the different types of angles, the different stories that I can tell. Because literally, I have to sing for my supper, right? Or I have to get every story that I can out there. Okay, so that's one way. Think about I have to think about the different angles that I can spin on reproductive health. And then next, how else can the story be written? In my newsroom in Rappler, where I have a regular column, our editors push us all the time to think of different ways to tell the story. It's not, we're encouraged to go beyond just text and photos to tell that story. So can you embed some sound bite, as in a short clip that I recorded on my phone and put it in there? Can we do a short video? Can we do infographics? And that goes back to also, for us, how are our stories read? Where do you guys get your news? Do you get it from TV or do you get it from your phone? How many from your phone? So you're not going to spend 5 minutes reading an article, because more or less you might be checking or reading something while waiting in line, while waiting for the next session. So that means for us as storytellers, our stories have to be shorter and crisper. Okay? So that's also how we have to start thinking about the platform and how we tell our stories. So we can do news, that's the regular stuff. You can do news features, profiles. I love to do profiles. We can do op-ed pieces, infographics, listicles. It's not just for BuzzFeed. And then usual rundown stories, okay, like trends. Trends are like rundown stories, okay? Then this is an example of a profile that I did. This is a story of, his name is Sam Kodoy. He's 19 years old, and he's the only midwife in his community in southern Mindanao. And actually the better title would have been mid-husband, because he wanted to be a doctor, but he was a government scholar, and the only scholarship that was open was one for midwifery. I would have never found this story if it weren't for my friends in UNICEF. I was looking for a midwife story for women deliver, and they said, "Do you want a guy midwife?" I said, "What? Are you serious? Is there such thing?" And I had to ask, wait, guy, really, guy? And then, and they were like, yes. And then it was great. So I got him and I got his story. And that was, again, another look at being a midwife and the roles that they play in the community. And he talked to me about how he had to get the trust both of the expectant father, the wife or the woman who's about to give birth, and now he had to learn about the side effects of birth control, for example, how he had to learn that by doing little field or what do you call that, backyard studies with his friends, asking them, just so they would believe him. Okay. Another story that we just did was HIV in Cosmo, Philippines. So this was part of the Pulitzer Center grant, and I love stories like this where we get out our messages on reproductive health in mainstream media. Like, I used to write for Playboy, and I'd write stuff like this, and that's where I'd like to see more of these stories in Cosmo, in Men's Health, in Playboy, in FHM. Okay. So we don't talk to the choir. And I like this, the editor, who is a friend of mine, asked me to write this story because she was seeing the posts that we were doing about the different stories on HIV, and it was about drug dens and all of this, and she called me and she said, I need an HIV story, but the drug den thing doesn't fly with Cosmo readers. What else can we talk about? So we talked about how, hey, as a young girl, your readership of Cosmo is about 25, you're susceptible to HIV and you may not even know it. And we wrote it that way. Okay, next, please. And then what platform? There are different platforms that are open to us also to tell the story, either on Facebook, on Instagram, and that helps. You know, sometimes you have this little tidbit of information that is really good, but not long enough to tell a story, right? A little interesting fact. I think that's where we can make use of other platforms like Instagram or Facebook or Twitter to get also those news bits out there. Okay, next. And then there's also new approaches. There's a group called Solutions Journalism. And if you look at what they do, they want to tell stories of finding solutions to the different problems. Because right now, news is just kind of all bad. But that doesn't exist in a vacuum. There are actually people, a lot of them here in this conference, who are working to find solutions to those problems. And those stories need to be told too. So that's another way, new approaches also of telling RH stories. Next, please. And just the last slide on do's and don'ts, because we were asked before, okay, what are some simple do's and don'ts for us to remember? Do you know who our audience is, who we're writing for? Sometimes I still get emails or press releases or asking me to attend some kind of launch of a new business platform. Does it have anything to do with sex? No. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I don't want to go there. I can pass it on to another journalist. And then make it easy to understand, especially if we want to try telling the same story with a new angle, whether it's business, climate change, that's new to me, but I need to understand that. I need to know what the reproductive health impact is. Okay? And then help us with access. That's really, really the thing. We can best work together with access to the stories that we want to tell, and we just have to be very conscious of the lines that we need to keep. Okay? And please don't send a PR as an attachment. I still get media advisories that say, please see attached. I check emails on the phone. It takes a long time to open an attachment. We'll just erase it. So just practical stuff on how to get your press releases better read. Don't ask to preview the article. I've gotten that a lot since the last couple of weeks that I've been here. Can we preview the article? No, you cannot. No. But there's always a rule. Well, no. I can clear the quotes with you, and I say that because when I'm reporting in a different country, there may be some kind of lost in translation element. Sure, you can see the quote, but you don't get to read the rest of the story. We don't do an interview if you do that. We might as well not meet. And don't spam. I'm saying, I put this out there because I had one story on human trafficking that I wanted to do, and an NGO helped us with access. They said there's a girl from southern Mindanao who was trafficked to Manila, and her house had burned because of the conflict, you know, the whole story. I said, great, can I meet her? And then I met another French journalist who was in town covering human trafficking as well. And he said, oh, I'm going down to southern Philippines to do a story about this girl. And it was the same girl. It doesn't look very nice. And I was like, wow, the NGO has nobody else? It doesn't look very nice, right? For the NGO as well to look like, is that the only person you've got out there as a case study? Maybe she was the most eloquent. Maybe she was the most, ready to speak. But still, it's not something that doesn't leave a good taste in the mouth, okay? And that's basically it. That's my last word on engaging with journalists and how we can better tell stories together. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just thinking about everything Anna said, because she basically echoed thoughts and experiences and the challenges, and I should perhaps just shut up because you've said everything. But yes, you really hit the nail on the head, that need to expand the conversation. And you do not, as journalists, you don't want to be relegated always to the vagina affairs segment of the newspaper. You want to engage with new audience. You want to engage with new people. That is what, that's the ultimate about telling good stories. I come from a country, I'm Nigerian, and I come from a country where I practice journalism in a country where if it's not political, it's not finance, you never get into the news section, not to mention the front page story. So it's about finding how to splice in reproductive health stories that I am very passionate about within those issues that hit the front page. For example, the project I worked with the Pulitzer Center, the stories I got to tell were stories about I forget, I'm terrible at pronunciation, but it's obstetric fistula, VVF, and it's the fact that the conversations go beyond the reason for this is underaged marriage, but it's about poor health care. It's about intentional corruption, diversion of funds. I was able to tell stories about, hey, what happens when aid ends, But what I pitched to the Pulitzer Center was, let's talk about why northern Nigeria, which is predominantly Muslim, hates Americans. Those are the kind of stories that immediately get attention, but that's the way to tell such stories. But how do you populate the paper or your publication with such good stories? It's about having conversations with experts, people who know, people who have access, to such individuals, such information. The problem with engaging with the mouthpieces or the experts behind organizations that run this particular sector across the developing world is that you get the boring stuff over and over again. You get being told the technical issues. Yeah, it's nice to put across your agenda, but you have to know that it goes beyond you just making happy your other end. You want to also engage properly with the audience. You want to engage with the population. And to do so, you have to give us more meat, beyond the regular. We're having a conversation earlier today, and I was talking about how much editors hate maternal health stories. You write 700 word story, and it's quite short, but then only 200 words end up in the paper because it's maternal health. However, the need to get those stories in, you need to engage beyond just me who pounds the pavement every day. You have to engage with the editors as well, and the media owners to bring together those two sides and constantly get that conversation in place. I remember there was this particular public relations officer I got along well with because her method of engagement was always very great. When she calls me up, she doesn't say something like, oh, I have this press release. She says, oh, I met her. Do you want to meet up? Let's talk about story ideas. And immediately I'm excited because, okay, finally this person understands where I'm coming from and the challenges I'm facing. I won't take too much more of your time, but I should just say that issues with maternal health, family planning, safe abortion, people talk about, oh, we are collaborating with journalists, but usually that's not true. Usually what you do is you involve journalists, and that is totally different. It's not enough to just involve us. You should collaborate with us. It should be a real partnership. I know if you've worked in Africa, what is prevalent is the fact that journalists are paid for stories. But usually that is as well the problem, because all you get when you do that, it's generic stories, you know, just a regurgitation of your press releases. But if you want real stories that translate statistics into change, statistics into good storytelling, engage with journalists who want to tell good stories and don't pay for stories. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Allison.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm gonna build on what the other two speakers spoke about and show you, sort of walk you through a case study of one of my stories and how it came together with the support of organizations. So if we can play, I'm gonna play a little video and then we'll talk.
Going to the goat is something that has been our tradition for a very long time. The young man used to live behind my house in a small room at the home of one of my relatives. We never really met. It was the 4th day of my period and I was sleeping in the goat. At about 11 p.m. or midnight, the guy came and raped me. I was very scared at that point and couldn't scream or even say anything to anyone.
The terror of a rape and the reality of an unwanted baby, a consequence of an age-old tradition called chowpatty. Here in far western Nepal, the practice, which has roots in Hinduism, requires women who are menstruating to stay in a goth, a space outside the family's dwelling.
I studied until the 7th grade. I had to leave midway due to my baby's birth.
Sleeping alone or piled in with other women, the goth is a vulnerable place.
I'm afraid of sleeping in the goat, but sleeping in the goat is a requirement.
If a woman on her period comes into the house, tigers will come and eat our cows, buffaloes, and bulls.
Village elders like Dambar Pul, who is also a traditional healer, preserve the custom of chowpatty in the villages, even though the government of Nepal outlawed it in 2005. In Acham, a remote district more than 300 miles from Kathmandu, societal change is slow. Although girls now attend school in this area, many people still believe that women who are menstruating are impure and bring bad luck.
During my period, I'm not allowed to touch water, come to the front of the house, cook food. I cannot do anything. They don't let me do any work that's in the house. I don't believe in chowpatty. I think if one stays clean, a period is a normal phenomenon, but my grandparents don't let me sleep in the house.
Even within family, there are divisions. Radhika's cousin is an activist who works for an NGO called Samabikas. For the past year, Dubar Sunar has traveled from village to village to talk about ending chowpatty.
Every time I try to talk about chowpatty, they get angry. They are so unwilling to understand this matter that if you go to them to talk about it, they will shout at you and ask you to leave. It's not that I haven't tried. Many people say that this is a slow process.
In a few families, women have begun to sleep in their own homes, perhaps in a separate bed, but most still practice the tradition, even when confronted by fearful memories each month.
Some people blame me for what happened, while some don't. Some love me, but some don't even speak to me. Things are done according to tradition here. If I have a daughter later, I won't do anything different. I'll send her to the goat.
Okay, so that story I did in collaboration with a writer, Lynn Castell, who's actually here. We did that story with the funding of the Pulitzer Center back in 2012. But that project would not have happened if it wasn't for the participation of some NGOs. The story idea actually came out of an informational meeting I had set up with somebody from the John Snow Institute. And we had met to talk about another story I was doing. I was about to go to India to do a story on adolescent pregnancy, and she'd spent a lot of time there, and so I came and we talked about that. And she just mentioned offhand, she'd just come back from Nepal, and there's this interesting topic, chowpatty, and I'd never heard of it. So when I went home, I Googled it, and there was nothing on the topic. There was one little report by UNICEF, and that was it. And so I went back to her and I said, I don't think this is really out there. Maybe it warrants a story. And so it became this project. Through her connections and through UNICEF, we eventually got out to do the story in Acham, which is a region out in Nepal's far western, northwestern side, very remote. And once we got out there, the way we connected to the story was through UNICEF. They were working very closely with Nepal's female community health volunteers, which is a really great program they do out there. Basically, it's women who work in communities that are from a half mile to, or more from a clinic or a hospital, and they engage these women to do healthcare and health reporting in their neighborhoods, and it's been a really successful program. So they were having a regional meeting. UNICEF was participating, and they invited us to go along. So we went to this meeting, and they introduced us and said, these are trusted journalists. They're doing a story. Would anyone like to talk about this issue in their community? And people began raising their hands and telling us stories, and it was absolutely, it blew our minds. I mean, there were stories, a lot of them, were stories about women who really enjoyed doing chowpatty. They found it as a break from work, and that was great. But then we heard other stories about women who had really bad experiences, women who had been raped or who had lost. We spoke to one woman whose daughter had built a fire in her little hut, and it caught on her sari, and she burned to death. And there were just dozens of those stories. And so we thought, this is great. And so people invited us out to their villages to do these stories. And the pictures are rolling now. We've got pictures from this too. But that's how we got our story. And it would not have happened without, having this informational interview with somebody from an NGO, which is something I like to do. It would not have happened without UNICEF inviting us in, introducing us to the community. So those links are really important to journalists. Many stories would just not get out there. So I wanted to show the story to talk about this because I consider my connections with organizations like yours to be invaluable, but I also consider them relationships. I consider them something that needs to be nurtured on both sides. So I am in frequent contact with people from lots of different groups and have had a lot of great stories recently. This story, as you see, was published in the New York Times. They ran it on their homepage. It got a lot of attention. It also was in the Christian Science Monitor. NPR did a piece from it. It went in several other publications. And it really got out there. And it became something that got a lot of attention. I've had dozens of other journalists contact me since then saying, hey, we'd like to do a story on this too. How do we get out there? And have connecting them back to my resources and the organizations that sent me out there. So that's just one example. Other organizations, MSF has connected me 2 years ago in the DRC, wanting to do a story in North Kivu on how conflict affects pregnancies and reproductive health, and brought us out to a very remote place that nobody else was going to. And allowed us to have an access we would not otherwise have had. They were in the region. basically talking to the rebel groups by radio every morning. And the groups had this sort of weird truce where they were saying, giving them tactical information about where they were and weren't going to attack that day, so that MSF could go in and treat people in return for their guerrilla fighters getting treatment with no strings attached by MSF. That would not have, been the kind of coverage we could have gotten on our own. I found a great story on illegal abortion in Mexico that I did for The Guardian through IPASS, another group that's here, who's helped give me background information. So all of this is to say, if you're in that position in your organization, you're attempting to reach out to media, consider having that kind of relationship where you establish a regular connection with different journalists that are working on the topic. Maybe you're going out to coffee. Maybe it's a Skype thing. I do a lot of Skype calls with people. But it's just sort of like, hey, this is happening. This is within your interest area. Let's talk about it. Goes so much further than a press release. So that's my basic message. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Allison. And we're going to move on to questions. I'll start with my own question, something I'm interested in, and Allison sort of started to touch on it in what she was saying, but as a reporter, I've noticed that there's sort of an inherent tension between the reporter and the spokesperson or the organization that we're working with, even though there may be sort of a shared broader agenda of elevating the conversation about a particular women's health topic. On a more granular professional level, your job is to get us to tell a particular story, and our job is to sort of get behind that to what we think is a story, which is often not exactly going to read exactly like your press release. And sometimes that can create tension in the field, and it's something I've experienced when I was reporting in Kenya. The kinds of stories that I was looking for weren't the kinds of stories that the NGOs wanted me to have, because they wanted me to tell a particular story about that NGO. When my story wasn't about that NGO, it was about the broader issue of unsafe abortion in Kenya. So I was hoping that maybe I'll start with Ameto, because I know you have some opinions on this. Have you experienced this sort of tension between the story that you're trying to tell and what someone's trying to get you to do? And how do you deal with that, and how can it be a more productive collaboration?
Okay. Yeah, I think all of us have had, that experience of the story you want to tell and the story you feel should be told, the story your editor were allowed to be told, and that which the spokesperson wants. I remember doing this story for on the U.S. foreign aid in northern Nigeria, and I needed to speak to individuals who had been impacted by projects by USAID and constantly being blocked, being told very, very shallow stories. Oh, Ameto, we care about you. We don't want you to get hurt. That's what, well, come on, I'm black, I'm Nigerian. This is the story I want to tell. And, they keep telling you this excuses that they won't tell a journalist who comes from the New York Times or Washington Post, but those are the barriers you constantly face. And on a particular level, you understand that they have their own agenda and they have issues they are facing, but then the truth is, as I said, it should be a collaboration. There should be some kind of middle ground that both sides, the journalist and the spokesperson, could be able to meet. Because at the end, like in this particular case, I still told my story. I found another way to go around them, above them, below them, and sort of get to the story I wanted to tell. So I think at the end of everything, it's about coming to the point that you realize that at the end, it's less about you and your organization and your agenda. Why those things, I do not disagree that they are important, but focusing on really what is at the core, and that's what we spend days at conferences like this talking about: the people, the individuals. We should remember that these are the actors that at the end are impacted. They're the ones who lose their lives, among other things, and by collaborating with journalists, not just involving them, we can sort of deal with that.
Thank you, great answer. Okay, I want to open it up to you guys. Does anyone have a question for any of our panelists? Yes.
You can just use this for the
Hi, my name is Abby Kosa, and I'm the executive director of an organization called Kupona Foundation. And one of the three things we do fundraising, we do what we call strategic storytelling, which we hope to be strategic, and we connect technical resources with our sister organization in Tanzania. This is super interesting to me. I'm actually not the comms expert. I have her next to me. But we've been interested in learning more about the best way to, and I really would say, collaborate. And so what was one of the things you said, I think, a couple times was the kind of stories I was looking for. And I was just curious, do you always go in with an angle, or is it sort of you go in thinking about potential stories that you think might resonate with people, and then that evolves? And then I guess my question would be for organizations like ours, and I certainly understand what you're saying, it shouldn't be about the organization, and for us too, it's really about who we are serving on the ground and what their experiences are. Is it still helpful for us to say, you know, here are sort of our objectives and goals for this. What we would hope to come out of it are these things, and to just have a more transparent dialogue. Just sort of thoughts on I guess, the best way to move forward. We are a very small team, so we're still exploring the best way to navigate this.
What a novel idea about transparency. Who wants to take this one?
Go for it. You have something to say?
Well, I like a certain focus when it comes to stories. And so I generally look at, if you give me a story on maternal health, I'll always ask, what's the new thing? Is it maternal health for a younger group? Is it maternal health out in conflict? Or what's the new thing? It always has to be that. Then there's times when a story follows you, or there's something that I want to know more about. So I think it really, really depends on what's out there. I keep an eye out for research when there's always a presentation of new studies, and I don't look at the top line stuff. I look at the little details that other people tend to overlook. Like UNICEF came out with a recent study that said that boys were like twice as more vulnerable to sexual violence in their home versus girls. And nobody really thinks that in the Philippines. You know, it's more of protecting the girls out there. So I think first, again, and that's my own experience, because I need to look for different ways to tell the story. I need lots of stories to tell because I work freelance. And you can imagine also that when I have to pitch a story to my editor, he's going to want something new. He's going to want something that only I can give him. Because why would he assign it to me versus assigning it to a staff writer? That's why it's really also important to consider who your journalist writes for. Okay, that really impacts on how we look for stories.
And yeah, please.
Okay, I was just going to add to what Annie noted. In art, people say today is not just about the what, it's about the how. You know, you can tell the story of Macbeth over and over again. It's the same story, but it's how you present it. But in journalism, while yes, we are storytellers, it has to go a lot more beyond that. It has to be the how and the what. You know, particularly in today where we're overwhelmed with so much information. However, for me, I think it's a combination of all you have said. I sometimes go in with an angle is that, wow, it would be nice to tell the story about this. However, I keep an open mind because I want to always be pleasantly surprised. I want my story to be rich. Also, sometimes, I know every journalist goes through this. You're in a dry spot. You're like, what am I going to write about? And you sort of go out there expecting something, you know, interesting, something that, because at the end, we know our audience, you know, apart from the fact that you're engaging with you and you want to reach a particular audience, we also know our audience, we know our platforms, we know our editors. And at the end, journalists are like marketers. It's about pitching it in a way that appeals. So I think it's a combination of everything. And so that's why, as you know, that collaboration towards telling strategic stories is very important. And how do you guys do that? It's about conversations, ongoing conversation.
And as to part of her question about, I mean, would it be helpful to you, I'll ask this to Allison since she hasn't spoken yet, about would it be helpful to you to have an organization be sort of upfront about their agenda when they're talking to you and say, here's what we want the story to be, and are you open to being sort of moved in that direction by an organization you're working with?
Yeah, I mean, I think transparency obviously is is the best way to go, right? What do you want? What do I want? And sometimes we can meet in the middle, you know, but you know, as journalists, we have pretty hard lines, ethical lines that we just can't cross. And sometimes that we just can't meet. We just can't do that. You know, you know, examples of that would be, you know, again, showing stories or like crediting certain things, or, you know, there's just a number of those, and the things that you may not know as somebody, you know, from an organization just may not have that kind of education. So I think it's important on both sides to be transparent, and for us to be able to say, here's what we can do and here's what we can't, and for you guys to do the same. Obviously, you know, this is a dialogue. And as to your question of like, you know, do we like to come already with our story ideas? Yeah, we generally do, but as Ameto said, like sometimes those, you know, we like to also come in with an open mind. I went into this Chowpatty story thinking these women who deal with this, they hate it. It's terrible for them, you know. They're gonna. But what I actually found was that some of the women were like, "We love this. This is the one time in our lives when we can rest. We don't have to do that much work, you know. We don't have to do anything for our husbands. It's awesome. People bring us our food, you know. So it's like a slumber party, you know." And someone actually kind of talked about it along those lines. So the point is like, you do have to go into a story just very ready to listen, and also ready for your story to change based on the facts. So I may go in and say, this is my story idea, help me with this. And you may say, well, that's a great idea, but that's not really how it is on the ground. Here's how it is on the ground. And I am open to that because that's what's happening. And that's the story we need to tell. So.
Can I just add something to that? Is anybody here working with government? Okay. I just like to share. Not for, but with. Okay. We, a couple of us journalists were asked to give a panel like this to our social welfare department. So they're always attacked in the media because, well, they have to do everything, whether it's homeless children, it's a typhoon, there's a conflict, whatever. They're always involved. And so it was the same thing. How do we better engage the media? And we had to kind of hardline and say, this is you know, this is how we tell our stories, and this is up to where we go. And one government official actually asked us, I just need to ask you, why are you guys so mean to us? Do you always have to be so mean? And we said, wait, what do you mean by that? It's always so critical. Don't you have anything nice to say? And we were all kind of looking at one another. That's not news. But does it always have to be bad? We had this long conversation, and we had to explain to them that the media functions as the vanguard. Okay, we are public watchdogs. So if there's something great that the Department of Social Welfare did, you have your own communications department to write about that. But that will never be what we do. We can't just keep on trumping the good stuff that you've done. And we had to kind of walk them through that. But we also didn't realize how, wow, we must look like absolute villains to them all the time.
When we were at the International Conference on Family Planning in Bali, we had a similar panel to this, and the first question was, why are reporters so terrible to work with? That made me laugh. Any other questions? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm wondering. Hello, yes. I'm wondering, when you are working with a nonprofit organization and you are covering something that they're doing, but you need an alternate perspective, say there's some innovation, there's something so cool that they're so excited about, and they're, you know, connecting you with people who are going to talk very positively about it, but you need to say, okay, well, there's another side to this. How do you go about sensitively finding the people who can speak to the other side while still maintaining a good relationship with the NGO that got you to that story in the first place?
That's a great question. I think there are many different ways, depending on where you are and what you're doing. I mean, when I'm working locally, I always generally try to find a fixer. Do you guys know what a fixer is? It's basically, it's sort of a media term, but it's somebody who's on the ground, who knows the issue, and maybe speaks a local language, can act as a translator, but just someone who can navigate me. Really, it's just sort of a cultural translator is how I think of them. Usually because of the stories I do, which are on maternal health or women's health, I try to find a woman. So usually that person is in the background, like making connections for me on the ground and trying to get me those perspectives. So often that's how I do it personally. You know, a lot of the writers I work with, they're already in the background, like trying to get government officials on the phone or finding other things. But I would say there is never a story I've done that I am solely relying on the NGO perspective. And that's actually a very good point, because that's something that you or anyone here working for an NGO should probably just assume, right? And you probably already do. But, you know, there are a lot of ways to do that.
Could I add to that? For me, I usually target former employees. Sometimes, usually they're going to go because they don't feel constrained by, you know, the umbrella of whatever. They will go out of their way to. Sometimes they'll say yes off the record, but yes, they would go out of their way to show you the other side. With NGOs as well, talking to government officials, because for some reason, despite the fact government officials or government entities, collaborate with NGOs, they usually have maybe this is not the right phrase, but they have the dirt on. So they'll be like, oh, it's not as nice as this. So, you know, sort of give you this, point you at areas that you could pursue to get, you know, an alternate view, so to speak.
These are interesting answers to me, because I usually, every time I'm interviewing someone, I'll always ask them, who's your biggest opponent? So they lead me to the other perspective.
That's great.
Yeah. Any more questions? Yeah.
I wanted to know, so at times where I've reported from extremely rural areas, sometimes I've had to stay with an NGO, or maybe that's like the only safe place to stay, or without putting a burden on someone's family. How do you find like the ethical boundaries of that? Because I mean, at least in India and Ethiopia, you're treated like a guest, and if you try to give money, it's like so offensive. So yeah, where do you see that, and how do you become as transparent as possible with that?
That's a great question. How cozy is too cozy with an NGO that you're writing about? Who can take this?
I'll take a crack at it. There are times when you don't even intend to work with an NGO, and out on the field where there's no transportation and everything has been washed away, you end up hitching a ride with one. And so all of a sudden that becomes working with them. And I'm going to give you an example. In the middle of Covered Cayenne, we were going to go to a village that was about 2 hours away before the typhoon. So you can imagine after the typhoon how much further away it was. And it was not accessible by anything except a 4x4. So I hitched a ride with one of the NGOs that was going there. They said, oh, we're going the same way. Why don't you just ride with us? And somewhere in between that 2-hour ride, he said, I don't know how to tell you this, but you are using our resources, so there is kind of a way that you should be writing the story. Really? And that was totally unfair, because what was I supposed to do, get out of the car and then walk the rest of the way? So I told him, you know what, you offered me this ride. I don't owe you anything else. You know, I'm here to write the story. You will give me access to it, and yeah, because of that, your organization will be mentioned, because yeah, you're part of the people or the humanitarian actors working on this, but that's not going to get you anything else out of that. So let's be clear about that as well. And then I told the higher communications people about it. I don't appreciate that kind of stuff, and I don't think other journalists would either, so just feedback.
Yeah. As for me, like, I always pay. I know it's sometimes rude, but I do it. It's like that is my ethical line. If I take something from you, I'm going to give you money. Even when MSF took us out in North Kivu, we figured out a pricing structure for how much the gas cost for the motorcycles, like, you know, how much time was involved, the place we slept, how much food we ate, and we insisted on paying for that. So for me, that is my line. I stick pretty hard to that. That's just me.
And would you consider staying with an NGO in a place where you were reporting?
Yeah, I've done that. I've done it because, you know, there are some places it is just the only option, just the only thing. you know, like MSF and Kivu, that's the only thing. And it was dangerous I mean, they had like sandbags that were like 15 feet high around their compound. I mean, you know, we went in there with people who were protecting us, and there was nowhere else to stay. So yeah.
Hi. Sorry. Hi. I had a slightly different question. I work with a youth-focused NGO, and one of the projects we're doing with partners at the moment is to try and work with young people to get them involved in media and also to support emerging journalists and new media. You've all worked with Pulitzer, obviously, and in your experience, is there anything, what can we do, what are the sort of things that we could do best when developing a program like that, that support them, the kind of things that they need starting out in their careers?
So I'm a local journalist. I work in Nigeria, and for a long time I felt as if, because I'm working in a country where there's a lot of corruption and the voices of journalists are stifled very easily, even in collaboration with your publishers. And I constantly felt as if I was talking into a microphone with weak batteries. You know, you just like, and you're confronting the fact that this question of how do you shame the shameless. And I remember we had this conversation this morning, taking advantage of larger platforms, international platforms, to embarrass our governments or individuals within our societies. And I think what Pulitzer did for me, and I'll use their template really to answer your question, is about reaching out to journalists who have ideas or who even have the spark of an idea and working with them. Sometimes just giving them confidence, you know. So that's usually the line that divides a good story and a great story. You know, the confidence to pursue an angle, you know, to the very end. So it's confidence, supporting them to develop their ideas, connecting them with mentors, you know, individuals that have been there and can guide them through that line. And lastly, I would say something the Pulitzer Center does. They have this education program that takes journalists into classroom. And at first I did not appreciate it. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to talk to a bunch of kids. But I can tell you that that opened my mind, you know, just to see not just the importance of what I do, but other ways that I could, you know, pursue stories to engage them. And I actually began to see myself as a different light in terms of being a journalist. So that is another thing, getting them forums where they can talk about their craft and the stories they pursue.
Can I add to that? I just want to add to that because I think Mero and I both went on a school tour sponsored by the Pulitzer Center, and I think what I learned from that, we would talk to the professors and ask them, what exactly do you want us to cover in these classroom sessions? And I think the value that we added was the teachers are professors. They're teaching journalism, but they haven't been out on the field in a while. So we brought that perspective of being out there in the field, what it's really like, these questions that come up, you know, and then how to find the story. And then also, I was asked to talk about how do you make money from being a journalist, and is it still realistic? So that was something I thought, okay, that's something we have to discuss, because it's not all romance, you know? If you want to train and build a career as a journalist, you've got to know how to make the numbers work.
Good point. I would also suggest giving young journalists some mentorships with older and more experienced journalists. Would be extremely, extremely helpful to be able to answer their more specific questions. We are out of time. Thank you so much for coming to this panel. I think it was a great discussion. And see you guys out in the field.
Oh. We also have a reception coming up right now, right? Next door, and you want to